The Hong Kong Institute of Chartered Secretaries recently held its 12th biennial corporate governance conference. In the following session, two speakers share their views on how to successfully build the board of a company. The first speaker is Nicholas Allen, Chairman and Independent Non-Executive Director of Link Asset Management Limited. He speaks about board constituencies, the criteria for selecting board members, and the board building process.
It's a pleasure to be up here speaking about building boards. The timing is good because as chairman of Link, where I also chair the nomination committee, I'm also chairman of the nomination committee at CLP, and both of those boards are currently in a process of building and adding to their board positions. So I wanted to talk primarily from a Link chairman point of view, but in order to do that, it's important to get an understanding, because every board starts from a different position. Link is a different board than other boards, and so I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what's different amongst boards, and then get into the question about search, what you look for, what you're trying to do in board members. So there are different board constituencies, and it's important to recognize that when you're looking at a board. When you look at the Hong Kong constituency, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange listed companies, the vast majority have major sponsoring shareholders. The vast majority will have either family or major shareholders who will normally have the chair and will normally have other seats on that board. And that has an impact on the dynamics of the board. Boards will also have executive management representatives, and they will also have independent directors. And how that mix works very much speaks to what the role of the chairman is and how the chairman should speak in those circumstances. So there are different chairman roles. There's chairman who does represent the major sponsoring shareholder. He's normally not independent because of that. He may be executive. And then you can have a genuine independent chairman. And then you can have the US model, which is where commonly CEO and chairman are the same person, and all of those have different dynamics. This is a quote from a furniture maker that I know quite well, which I thought would be well appreciated. But it is helpful in the dynamics of a board to have sometimes those three constituencies to be able to talk around what the key issues are, rather than simply having two constituencies in the board. And when I look at Link, and I look at contrast it with CLP, at Link, we have no sponsoring shareholder on our board. And as a result, it is the two-legged stool that I described before. So it is a predominantly INED-led board. And then if I look at CLP, it is very much a three-legged stool with both shareholder representatives as well as a smaller proportion of INEDs. And so from a Link chairman point of view, when I took over as chairman, you kind of felt, well, which side of the aisle am I on? Am I leading the independent director group interacting with management? Or am I sitting on the management side of the table, providing them support as they deal with board issues? And the outcome of it is that you are constantly shifting your chair around the table as you seek to make sure that management feels supported by board, and at the same time that the independent director group feel that they have leadership in terms of the governance objectives that they have. And it is sometimes a chameleon-like role that you're playing in trying to bring that board dynamic to be the most effective. But let me talk about board building. It's a subject very close to my heart. As I said earlier, it always helps if you know when your board vacancies are going to come up. If you don't, then it's much more difficult in terms of your planning process. And it is always a journey. You know, we typically will have a focus on board structure after our annual strategy meeting, because until you've had that annual strategy meeting, you can't be projecting forward as to who you would like to have joining your board. So it's always looking outwards. Your strategies will change, your stakeholders may very well change, and the people who sit on your board will change as well. So being able to look out 2 to 4 years is a great opportunity to have. Board roles are not filled overnight. If you want to get good people, they're usually busy themselves. It's very helpful to know when people are coming free on other commitments that they have, when they might be retiring from full-time work, but you have to kind of get that timing work. As a board, you will have diversity goals, but both gender, ethnicity, and other diversity goals, and that needs to be built into your board building. And size itself is an interesting subject. Hong Kong is a big board jurisdiction, I would say, and an element of that is because of sponsoring shareholders. I think if you looked at the US, board sizes would typically be in single figures. In Hong Kong, they're very rarely in single figures. And so what size you want, what the right dynamic is in building a board is important. And it's always about judgment. There is never a right answer. In kind of talking about current themes around board building that I'm very focused on, question is how much actual CEO experience do you want to have around your board table? I'm becoming more appreciative of having a greater proportion of CEO experience around a board table, and it's not always the case that you are able to deliver that. How much entrepreneurial talent do you have around your table? Because you're really trying to make sure that your board is not a drag on your management because of their concerns about governance and their risk appetite, that you're getting that balance right between people who have been on boards before, who have sat on the other side of the table in the management team, and therefore can understand all the perspectives that you're looking at, rather than being somebody like myself who was trained as an accountant and a consultant, who tends to sit across the table and doesn't always have that perspective. I think that the other point I would make is that, talking about building boards, we're always in a position where we're halfway through the process. If you're starting off at the beginning building a board, say at an IPO, then you'll tend to target to have your senior director first, and then your audit committee chair second, and then you're able to build your board around that. So my approach, I guess it's a personal style. We all have our personal styles. Usually somebody who seeks unanimity around a board, I usually try and seek consensus. Not always the right way to go, I've learnt. It's healthy to have directors with different views and some directors with sharper elbows around the table. I think the challenge for those directors is getting the balance right about sticking to their points of view, but doing it in a manner that enables the board to move forward on a collective and collegiate way. And that's one of the big challenges about board building, is how do you assess at the outset whether you're getting a director who will participate well within your group, and how do you assess them on their journey as a director. One of the most difficult things is each time that you come up to have directors who have to go back to have their reappointment, is to decide whether you want to reappoint them or not. And I think today it's very difficult for that not to be a kind of negative assessment. I just want to make sure they've not done anything wrong, rather than how well have they performed as a director. And I think that's kind of one of the challenges going forward. But as a chairman, I'm working hard to avoid the temptation to choose people that agree with me and make my life easier, and as I say, have some sharper elbows. What I wanted to do was to make some remarks just around tenure, and I've made those remarks already. Very important for me for board building to have fixed tenures. And I think that if there was anything that you're trying to build into your processes, that would be my preference. And then the other thing is regular board appraisals and director appraisals, because that gives you the ability to focus on your board and your skill set. So currently, boards are having regular board assessments and appraisals, normally every 3 years. Really important to continue to do that and to have that reflection each time as to how your board is going. What are the common characteristics of strong boards? They're smaller, and I think that's a challenge around Hong Kong. Much more industry expertise, I think, than we probably currently have around board tables at the moment. We've tended to populate our boards with governance experts, and we need to get the balance right between people who really understand that industry. And successful boards tend to have people who have stayed on there slightly longer. And then the question comes in about experience as a CEO and experience as an entrepreneur, which will probably be a fourth circle in that structure. And so what we do at Link is that we regard it really important to have experts help us find our directors. Because we have tenure limits, we know when we're going to need directors, so we can go out and we tend to have not just specific mandates to find a director at a point in time, but a rolling mandate to assist the Nomcom over time as a constant discussion. Active nomination committees are very important. It should be part of the annual strategy discussion, and as I said, chairman must be prepared to have people that don't agree with him around the board. Just wanted to make some remarks about the role of the corporate team in this, and I've set them out on that chart. Important to have a view, important to be up to date in what industry is doing. It's important to be gently nudging or pushing and the effectiveness reviews, important to participate in the dialogue, important to be proactive in dealing with your chairman and your board so that you're keeping front of mind what the key elements are in helping to build the board. And I will stop there, and thank you.
The second speaker is Michael Ling, Deputy Company Secretary of CLP Holdings Limited. He delivers practical advice on facilitating the onboarding process so that newly joined directors may fully understand the company and perform their roles more effectively.
Picking up from where Nick had finished, it's about the company's secretarial role in helping the new director to, in Peter's words, get up and running in the first board meeting. I think practically it's going to be difficult and not easy for any newly joined director to be able to contribute as well as other directors in the room in the first board meeting. But I think from a practical perspective, I would say that from an onboarding process perspective, it's an ongoing process, and it takes as long as a couple of months to anything up to 12 months. And I think even for some of the more experienced directors, some have said that for those joining, say, an audit committee, it takes a good part of an initial 3-year term to really understand the complicated financial and accounting reporting and standards for a listed company. So for my section, I will focus on 2 parts: why it is important and what does it involve. What does a modern board look like? I will cover that briefly, and then I'll cover a bit about what are the expectations of a new director and some of those challenges that come with joining a modern board. And in the second part, I will cover the actual onboarding process, and hopefully I'll be able to share with you some of the more practical tips as to how to go about the onboarding process. So Nick gave a very nice picture of the Link board room around, and for my part of the talk, I'm not going to talk about what a modern board looks like or what a future-looking board looks like, but I think most of you will agree with me that it won't look something like that in the photo. So what I'd like to touch on is what are some of the issues confronting a modern board. And Nick spoke about board appraisals, and today there is greater emphasis on the effectiveness of a board and what a high-performing board would look like and what are some of the typical issues. Of course, the list of issues on that slide is by no means exhaustive, but it's a snapshot of what would some of the more topical issues look like for a board. There are, of course, the more traditional responsibilities, the strategic focus, oversight of risk management, and to the more legal and regulatory compliance for the organization as a whole. And also, the board will have to be very much up to speed with the more modern issues facing a board, or issues that the board would be expected to manage, such as board refreshment that Nick touched on earlier, the desirable level of diversity at the board. Of course, ESG is an important area, in particular, the governance for ESG issues. and also setting the tone at the top for the organization, the corporate culture for the board and for the organization as a whole. And of course, the board, very much in line with future-proofing the board will need to tackle or address transformative challenges for the organization as a whole. And in building the board, in looking forward to build the board, to consider certain expertise to bring onto the board. Nick touched on bringing on the CEO experience, the corporate governance professional, and more topical nowadays, selected expertise areas such as cybersecurity, tech, innovative experience. These are the more forward-looking aspects of the board. So that will give a sense of the issues confronting a more modern and high-performing board. And what does that mean for the new joining director? I think the days of looking to build a board for profiling a company or profiling the board is behind us. I think more and more nowadays, boards or chairmen are looking to build the board and inviting board members to become a strategic asset to the board and to the company. And in the earlier slide, I touched on certain expertise for the board, and I think more increasingly so, chairmen or the boards are looking to bring on new board members with unique insights and contributions. I touched on a little about the expertise, the experience and knowledge, and these type of contributions are very much highly valued by the board. So to put it simply, new directors will be able to contribute as soon as they can in joining the board. And I think another area that is that a new board member would be expected to come to appreciate very quickly is the board dynamics. There is the board dynamics within the boardroom between the chair, the non-execs, and the independent directors. And there's also the boardroom dynamics between the board and management. And I think it can be quite daunting for a new board member to navigate through all of those interesting board dynamics in the boardroom. So what does that all mean for a new joining board director? It does create some challenges, and this is very much based on rather informal survey that I've spoken to various people, and here are some of the more common challenges. The challenges of understanding the personalities of each board member, the culture of the board, dynamics of the board, when to speak, when not to speak, when to ask the right questions. That really sums up the challenges of a new director, regardless of how experienced that director may be. To another challenge, which is a simple comment, but it's not an uncommon feedback. It's just generally understanding the business as a whole. And to another type of comment where the lack of time with CFO or finance team on the financial reports. I think that comment reflects that different board members have a different focus. Some may be more focused on the financial aspects, some may be more focused on the strategic aspects. And I'll come on and touch on this point about how that is significant in the context of onboarding. And there are the comments where there's simply no formal onboarding process at all. And hopefully I will be able to share with you in the next session from our experience what the practical considerations would be for an onboarding process. So in this part, I will focus on the process itself. So if we want to identify or set out what is a simple objective of the onboarding process, I think it's really to help a new joining director to overcome those challenges that I've mentioned earlier. And I think the board has to realize that the opportunities of joining the board is limited, and each director should be regarded as a strategic asset. So successfully integrating the new talent and perspective should be the key objective of the onboarding process. And I think if we take a step back and trying to build on some of the board building that Nick had mentioned, I think companies and boards spend quite a lot of time and resources and effort in identifying the right candidate. Nick mentioned about the board strategy process, followed by identifying new talent on the board. And I think that's all part of the pre-hiring, the board analysis, defining and looking for the right profile, whether it's a formal process or an informal process, looking for candidates with the right personality, the right fit to the board and to the organization, and also the right culture fit, the individual's candidates' knowledge, expertise and experience. Now, that's very much part of the board building phase. Now, for the company secretary side, or for the onboarding process, it's about how to leverage off and build on all the qualities identified in the candidate and to help the candidate to integrate into the new boardroom. Now, having identified the need for the process, so whose responsibility is this? The Hong Kong Stock Exchange Corporate Governance Code, in one of the principles, it stipulates that the company's secretary should facilitate the induction of directors. Now, I think that the way that's kind of drafted, it contemplates that the company secretary cannot do this alone. And I think the emphasis has to be the facilitation of the induction of directors. And I think from a practical perspective, for any meaningful onboarding process to work, it has to have the support from the board and the CEO on the management side. And I think the essential element of the onboarding process is understanding the company, understanding the board and the board dynamics, and the dynamics between the board and the management. So for the onboarding process to work, there has to be the key buy-in and the support from, on the board side, the chair, and on the management side, the CEO. So from the company secretary perspective, as a practical tip, that kind of green light and endorsement from the chair and the CEO, I would say, is key and vital to the process. Having set out the responsibility of the onboarding process, landing it on the company secretary's desk, I think from our experience, there's great importance in taking a bespoke approach. Nick mentioned about, there are different boards, different companies out there. There is that saying that, if you've seen them once, you've seen them all. But I think in a board or director's context, each board is different. And one would go as far as saying that if you've seen only one board, you've seen only one board. I think we have to recognize that each director is different, each board is different, and each company is different. And this is regardless of the industry, the business, or the director, whether the director is a seasoned director professional, or it's a first-time director, or an example where Nick had made, where it's a CEO who's been on board, but on the management side, but joining a board member as an independent director. And that is very different to his or her own experience from being on the board as an executive. So I think it's important to appreciate that it is a bespoke process. It is about getting to know what the new director, his background, and his own personal focus for the board, whether it's financial or whether it's strategic or whether it's a risk issue. And I think it's important to approach it as it is not about professional training and development. And I think it shouldn't be approached and prepared as professional training and development, because I think that sends a very wrong message and signal to the new director. It's really about helping the director to understand the company, understand the board dynamics, and understand what are some of those issues facing the board. And I think I'll end on the note that Nick has made about being proactive. And I think part of that bespoke approach is taking a proactive approach to work with the new director. And I think it's about putting together a framework, being proactive, getting feedback from the director as the program goes along, and be prepared to tweak the program as you go. And that's all I have for now. Thank you very much.